When Luminar Neo released the fall upgrade, it came with a tool called Light Depth. Now, I've been experimenting with it, and today I just want to show how you can take a photo from looking like this to something like this using tools only inside of Luminar Neo. So let's go ahead and jump into the computer. All right, so here we are inside of Luminar Neo. And of course, if you would like to follow along with this tutorial, you can do so by using the link in the description box below. So the first thing that we need to do with this particular image is just kind of develop that raw file. And so when you work with raw files inside of Luminar, you get access to develop raw. So I'm just going to click here and start working with my image. Now, typically I would change the camera profile, but today I'm not going to worry about the camera profile change because with this image, it actually only gives me two options here. So I'm just going to work with the Luminar default. The images that you work with, you may get more options, but that's just the limitation of working with this file. Nonetheless, what I want to do, because I know I want this image to be a little bit darker, is I'm going to pull down on my exposure. And I don't need to pull too far because a lot of that light depth tool is going to play the role. So when you start working with your images and you know you're going to use a lighting tool, don't overdo it in the develop. Just kind of set the tone for what that next tool is going to do. All right. Now, I know I want to add some contrast, so I'm just going to throw a little bit of contrast. A little goes a long way. And since this is all non-destructive, we can always come back and re-edit this portion of the photo if necessary. So I'm not overthinking this. And then, of course, I know that the highlights, I want to increase those just so that way they really pop on the subject here, but I'm going to pull down on my shadows because I like to go negative on my shadows. It's just a personal preference. And so that's all I'm going to do inside of the develop raw. We'll close that out. And just so we know where we came from, here is the before and here's the after. Now I get it. It looks dark, but we're going for a darker look overall. So it just makes sense. Now, the very next step that I'm going to do is come over here to light depth because I like to work with my lighting effects before I do color and all that other stuff. So I'm just going to pull this up to about 50%. That way we can really see what's happening here. We can always dial this back a little bit later. But if you're not familiar with the light depth tool, it's a way of relighting your scene in 3D space. It's actually really cool. I'm excited that it's here, and I've been using it on quite a few images since it's been released. So I know that I want this to be a relatively narrow looking light beam, if you will, because he's looking up in this direction. So it just makes sense to make it a little bit more narrow and make it interesting to see, like, what is he looking at? Maybe the light source itself. So we're just going to pull this down, the little handle here. That's what I'm pulling down. If you make it larger, it's going to cover a larger space. And if you make it smaller, it's going to cover a smaller space. And that's all that really matters here. And then, of course, I can move this back and forth in 3D space. So if I wanted to light those trees, I could do that. If I wanted to light the foreground, I can do that. But I want it to be on the subject and just on the plane where the subject is. And that's why I'm making this much more narrow. So maybe somewhere around here looks about right. That may actually be too far behind him. So I'm going to pull it closer in front of us. And you see that the light is just like coming right in front of the boot and then it's covering him. So that's about where I want it. When you're doing this for yourself, you'll figure that out for yourself. Now, what I want to do is soften this light. So that's just going to make it a little bit more diffused as it goes into this area. So it looks more natural as it's blending. And as much as I'm making a creative edit, I still want it to look relatively natural. So that's the reason why I'm doing it that way. Then what I'm going to do is come down here to the advanced settings, and I'm going to pull the brightness near down, and the brightness far, I'm also going to pull down. And so what that does is it darkens the background and the foreground. So these elements, if you look at this display here, the elements that are outside of the white overlay, that's going to be your background here at the top and your foreground here at the bottom. So I want those areas to be dark because I want the light and the focus to go on my subject. So I'm going to go ahead and close that down, and we are good to go there. The next step is to add in a little bit of atmosphere to the image. And there's a ton of ways to do it, but Luminar makes it really easy with the Mood tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Mood, and then I'm going to click on LUT. And if you have your own .cube files or your own LUT files, you can load them into Luminar Neo and use those. And if you're not familiar with LUT files, that's fine, because Luminar gives you quite a few to just play around with. Now, the one that I want to go with is inside of the creative section. And so what I do is you just hover over creative, and then you just bring your mouse over the LUT, and it overlays it onto the image so you can see exactly what it's doing to your file. And you just cycle through these until you find one that fits the fill or the environment that you're trying to set for the overall photo. And this is more of a creative looking image. So I think I'm going to go with something that may not look as natural, but still makes it look interesting. And that's all that I'm trying to do here, is create something that looks interesting. You could even call it cinematic, if you will. So I'll go ahead and click on wooden, because that's the one that I think looks good. And if I turn it off and turn it on, this is what it looks like at 20%. I think I'm going to increase the look of this particular LUT by moving the amount slider to the right. And I think 60 looks about good. Now, if I turn that off and turn it back on, I think that looks good. So what I'm noticing now is I'm losing some saturation and some of that contrast that I already had. Well, the cool thing about the mood slider is it gives you access to the contrast and a saturation slider. So I'm just going to increase the contrast. That way we have those really dark transitions to really bright transitions. And then we'll also increase the saturation here just a little bit. I don't need to go crazy with it because I want to deal with color a little bit separate from everything else. So I think we're good with the mood overall. We'll go ahead and close that down, and then we'll scroll up to color. And color is just like the HSL slider inside of pretty much every photo editing software. So I won't spend a whole lot of time explaining this one, but what I want to do is increase the greens and the yellows so that way they pop through, and then maybe decrease some of the other colors. So I'm just going to bring the reds down, because the reds can be a little bit darker. And that's also impacting this little path that's leading up to the main subject here. Now, oranges are going to be tricky because that light beam that we created is also orange. So you may not want to touch your oranges, or maybe create a separate color instance and mask that in, but I'm not going to worry about that for this particular tutorial because I think global edits work pretty good for what we're creating here. I will increase the yellows though, because that just enhances the light overall. And then I'm going to jump over to my saturation. And I was on luminance earlier, by the way, which is just the light values of each color. I'm going to jump over to saturation. And with the yellows, I'm going to play around with those. I can make them a little bit more saturated, which I think looks pretty good overall for this photo. But, you know, you want to be careful. Overdoing things just never looks good. And then for the greens, I want to play with those a bit because we do have green in the image. And I don't know if a desaturated look or I think a more saturated look is coming through a little bit better. And then let's see about these reds. I don't like what the red is doing to the subject's face there. I guess it's not too bad when I actually let it go, so we'll let it play. Let's take a look at where we started and where we've come so far. I think that this is looking pretty good overall. Maybe increase some of the vibrance just to give the photo like the color overall. So I think that this looks good, and we'll go ahead and close this out. So now the last thing that I need to do to get this to, or one of the last things that I need to do to get this to where I want it to be, is I want to darken the foreground just a little bit more. And so I'm going to do that with a develop tool, and then I'm just going to pull down on the exposure. And then we'll click on masking and I'll go linear gradient. And I'm just going to pull this into the feet of the subject there. And then just come back and we'll adjust the actual exposure value here. So maybe somewhere around here. And that's just darkening it down just a little bit more and making this a little bit more mysterious of an image. And that's kind of the goal that I want to go with here. So now what we need to do is apply just a little bit of film grain, and this is subjective. You don't have to apply film grain. I just like to apply a little bit of film grain in my faded looked images. So that's the reason why I'm applying it. And so we'll close down the film grain, and then the final thing is the crop. Now, with Luminar Neo, you can do a lot of different crops. They even have this composition AI. I personally like to create my own crops, so I'm not going to use that tool. And what I'm going to do is click on the 4:5 aspect ratio. And then I'm just going to pull this down. Now, if you want to go cinematic, you could absolutely go 16:9, which I think would work well for this particular image. The problem is you lose a lot of the context, in my opinion, because I want a lot of space above him since he's looking in this direction, and also want more information over here. So that way it looks appropriate. So I would probably do something like that if I was going cinematic, but the issue is then balancing him with these little trees over here. So that's the reason why I'm not going 16:9. You absolutely could if that's something that you like, but I'm going to go with a 4:5, and then I'm just going to pull this down and put him somewhere around here. And you'll notice that he has plenty of space that he can look into the frame, and the tree back here is pretty balanced. It's small compared to him, so it doesn't take up that much presence in the frame, but it gives context and scale for him as well as the rest of the trees that are around him. So that's the reason why I'm building the composition this way. And so we'll just go ahead and apply that. And then we'll take a look at the before and the after. So really easily inside of Luminar Neo, you can develop images that look dramatic and also really interesting just by using a few tools. If you found value in today's video, smash the like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. Now, if you want to pick up Luminar Neo, you can do so using the affiliate links down in the description box below. I do make a commission from everyone who uses them, but it's at no extra charge to you. It's a win-win and a great way of supporting the channel. If you got questions, leave them in the comment section. And until the next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.